How can we understand the impact of the arrival of rail on the lives of ordinary people in the long 19th century?
So we wanted to make sense of where all the railway stations were in Victorian Britain. So to do this, we got in touch with the Railway Canal and Historical Society, who had in their possession an incredibly valuable reference work produced over many, many years by local historians and enthusiasts, in which they documented in comprehensive detail the location of every station to have been built in Britain.
They found this really exciting data set. It was in a Microsoft Word format, and it was more than 500 pages of mentioning all the railway stations, passenger railway stations in Great Britain.
And wasn't what we call machine readable. There was no way for this data set to interact with other material we had.
And our task was to convert this quite unstructured data into something structured, something that could be usable.
For each station that emerged during the 19th century and later, we tried to find like a point on the map and then say, okay, this station was there and was created in this year.
And creating a new data set, which is called STOPS-GB, which is an open data set we've now published, which anyone can access and download, which geolocates every railway station anywhere in the British landscape. What we wanted to then try to do was to try and bring that data set into connection with a separate data set we created using MapReader, which was a data set about the location of the railway tracks all around the country. Now, you would think that people knew where the railway tracks were, but in fact, the creation of various railway track data sets using MapReader highlighted various gaps in well-known existing data sets and gave us a very strong basis for trying to then bring that together with information about where the railway stations were located.
Immediately, the maps are kind of an exciting primary source to help us track, literally to map, the expansion of rail and all of the infrastructure related to railways, sidings, warehouses, stations, to really think of this holistically and understand what we call kind of like the footprint of railway infrastructure, or a new concept that we've called railspace, to understand the footprint of railspace across all of Britain.
So having created a data set of railway stations and having used the OS map collection to understand where the railway tracks were located, we then made use of a third data set taken from the census, which gave us information about the streets on which different people lived.
Before living with machines, this just wasn't possible because people were associated with the parish they lived in. We knew the parish that people lived in the census, but we didn't have their location on an actual street. And obviously there's a big difference in the spatial resolution between working at a parish level, which is quite aggregate, to working at a street level. And by geolocating individuals in the census to a street level, that opened up a whole new range of research questions that we were able to address.
Were there patterns, we asked, about who lived where? What kind of people lived near railway stations? What kind of people lived near railway tracks and perhaps suffered the noise and the smell of a steam engine, but did not get any benefits from the railway station itself? So this is an attempt to try to tease out those kind of patterns in demographic change, which historians and geographers have been very interested in for years, if not decades.
In this great convergence experiment, allowed us to start to ask questions about what were the amenities of rail and how did they connect with or interact with the disamenities of rail, by which we meant basically it was good to be near a station, particularly if you had a job where you needed to be mobile or commute, but it wasn't so clever to be entirely surrounded by the railway system.
The kind of classic markers of socioeconomic status, like how many servants people had and types of occupations that people were engaged in on those streets, we found differences between streets where you had heavy rail space and light rail space. So on streets that were particularly close to heavy rail infrastructure, you tended to find less well-off families that were less likely to have servants. Whereas in areas where you had lighter rail infrastructure that was perhaps, it's not as noisy, it's not as, you haven't got the smell, the smoke, and those kinds of disamenities around it, you tended to have more affluent families living in those areas.
And sure enough, what we found was that well-to-do people, particularly in certain types of commercial job, they tended to live near stations, but not very near dense rail. And we show that in various ways in the paper. But it was only possible by having brought these three new sources together for the first time. When I talk about the project and try to explain what's so powerful about the Turing ethos, I have to say, the thing I always talk about most of all is the free coffee machine. But it's also about trying to curate the environment where people can be imaginative, innovative, collaborative.